Alex, I noticed throughout the program we refer to something called the communication cycle. It seems like it's fundamental to a lot of the skills that we are teaching and trying to achieve as an authentic leader. What is the communication cycle? What are the components of it?
Well, the communication cycle is key to all of our programs because at the basis of all interactions is the ability not only to give information but to involve other people and to acknowledge what they've contributed. So the communication cycle is broken up into 3 distinct segments, which you notice as you look at it. At the top of the circle, we have advocate, which is to speak, so sharing information with other people. If you move to the right, the next module or segment of it would be inquire. So not only to check in with people, but getting them to explore and creating a sense of discovery in terms of their own thinking and also involving them in getting more information from you and what you're asking them to do.
Almost like just asking questions.
Almost like asking questions, but it's more than just saying, do you understand? So another question that might be more of a discovery question would be, what approaches have you considered in terms of how we would address the situation?
Okay.
So a little more open-ended, a little more discovery. And then the third and final segment is to reflect. So to demonstrate your understanding of what the other person has said. We've also included in the communication cycle the need to make conscious decisions as to when should you advocate, when should you inquire, and when should you reflect. You'll also notice by looking at the communication cycle there are no arrows. So you're not required to go in any direction. The last piece that I would like to point out on the communication cycle is that you'll notice that each of those 3 elements are represented in 3 equal proportions of that circle. And so the goal would be to do that in a balanced way. So give as much time and attention to each of the 3 as opposed to just speaking or just asking questions.
So they're all equally important, and that's what the model represents.
Absolutely.
Are there times as a leader where I may want to be spending more time in one of those 3 areas?
Well, yes, and at the same time, we don't want leaders to be caught in the trap of only giving information from their point of view. You know, as we've talked about previously up to this point, the goal of authentic leadership is to be open to and learn and understand what other perspectives exist in addition to your own. So I would say if you were going to err on giving too much time to any of those 3 segments, the reflection or the listening segment would probably be the most appropriate.
From a participant point of view, is there one segment that's more difficult to learn than the others?
Well, I would say the advocacy, speaking, we've all pretty much got that down.
We like to talk.
Absolutely, because we all want to share our point of view from our perspective. The inquiry, I think people are pretty comfortable with that because generally we ask questions from our own perspective and our own point of view.
Is that okay?
Well, yes, it is okay, and the thing you have to be careful of is when you ask questions, you're basically still in control of the conversation because you're directing people to give you information in the areas you're interested.
Okay.
So
most of us are good at the advocate or the talking and good at asking questions.
Not so good on the reflection, and that's really a key leadership quality is being able to create a forum for other people to share their perspectives.
Okay, so it would be when I'm teaching this particular piece, it seems like I'd want to spend the most amount of time then on the area of listening and reflecting. Would that be accurate?
Yes, and that's the most challenging for people because it's all about giving up control over the conversation and simply being open to going wherever the person who's speaking is interested in going.
Okay. So tell me then, how do I teach and focus in on the idea of reflect or listening?
Well, when we teach listening, what we'll do is we'll make sure that we all have the same definition.
Okay.
Because a lot of people think listening is simply sitting with your mouth closed. And what I think that basically represents is waiting for your turn to talk. So in order to really use reflective listening well, It's a set of skills that you use. So it's not just one thing. There's a number of things that happen.
Okay.
The goal of listening is to demonstrate that you understand the thoughts and the feelings that the other person's communicating. And that demonstration is going to involve you speaking, so you actively have to share what your understanding is with the person who's talking.
So it's almost like you're saying two things. Listening is taking in information, but there's also a time where I'm talking too.
Which is to get confirmation that what I understood is what you wanted to convey.
Okay.
So the goal is to understand the information from the other person's perspective.
Okay. So tell me a little bit more about what's the mechanics? How do I do that?
How to listen.
Yeah.
Well, there's some nonverbal skills, which are simply body language. So there's a lot of nonverbal communication. So we call that attending. And attending is basically eye contact, head nods, facing the person who's talking to you.
Sort of like what I'm doing now.
Exactly.
Huh? Okay.
So you're demonstrating good listening skills,
Good.
or at least attending skills. The second piece is a little more active, and it's what we call the active listening phase, which is where you are going to verbally confirm what you've understood. You're going to paraphrase, summarize what you heard in your own words. And then the reflective listening is trying to pick up what's being communicated behind the words.
The meaning.
The meaning, yes. And what that builds on is it's not just the content, it's how the content was delivered. For example, someone could say, well, I love all the changes going on around here. So the words convey that they enjoy it, but if it's done or delivered with a sarcastic tone, it really means that I'm not happy.
Mm-hmm. So it's paying attention to the whole thing, the words people are saying,
Mm-hmm.
their body language,
Right.
and tone.
Exactly. And facial expressions.
Okay.
So the piece that a lot of people struggle with is the reflection, because that seems to be atypical of what most people would do.
Is that the same as paraphrasing?
Well, it is the same as paraphrasing, and what we usually tell people, what you want to do is take in the information, so just hear it. Okay. And then as you hear it, sort it out. What is the person trying to say? What's the meaning that's embedded in this? And then what we're suggesting is that you sum it up, summarize what you've heard, and then just simply say it back to the person.
Tell you.
Yes. And in saying it back, there's some guidelines. Put it in your own words. You don't want to parrot what the other person has said. You want to be brief, to the point, and you want to also share with them your understanding of the emotion, or what we'd say be empathic or empathy. And you want to go for the meaning, what's behind it, mm-hmm. and just keep the focus on the other person.
What do you mean by keep the focus on the other person?
Well, what we mean by that is, in essence, starting out your reflections with the pronouns you, you are, your, versus using I, me, and mine.
So instead of what I hear you saying, or I want to do such and such, I would look at it from your perspective.
Yeah.
You feel this way. You sound like this.
Versus I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
I know what you mean.
Okay. Is there anything else that I need to know in order to be a good listener?
Well, I would say that the challenge comes when you're trying to listen to people that have strong emotions. So they're having a reaction to what you're saying. So it's really important to stay in that listening mode versus going into more of a defensive mode.
Or reacting to what you're saying.
Yeah. And when people do have strong reactions, it's really important to stay open so that they can vent and they can share what their feelings or what those emotions are. And you also want to be aware of when it does happen, especially at work, what might be driving that. So it's really important to understand what's underlying it.
It seems as though it would be easy to do that, and yet this, you mentioned, was something that's tough for people to learn. Any tips for me in helping participants to understand what listening is?
Well, what's going to be really critical is for you to demonstrate the skill of listening when you're managing the group.
So I need to be able to listen well as an instructor.
Yeah, so when people make statements or they ask questions, you're sure to use the reflective listening before you respond, because the natural tendency is for you to simply answer the questions or to give your perspective.
I need to model it.
Absolutely.
Throughout, not just when we get to the communication cycle.
Exactly. So right from the beginning, you demonstrate it. And in the beginning, it will be transparent and invisible. And as people start to learn it, what you'll start to hear is, you've been doing that. You're doing it now. So people become aware of that. And what that does is it really demonstrates that it is something that is transparent and it is possible to do this.
Do you get any pushback? Are there typical objections because this is a very difficult thing for people to do? What kinds of things do they resist when I'm teaching this?
So what's most difficult for
Yeah.
people? One of the things that's difficult for people is you will have people say, well, this is stupid. Why would you repeat what someone just said? I mean, if I understand it, why do I need to say it? So you'll get that. And sometimes that comes from people that, and I don't mean to be judgmental, but they have a need for high control over what's going on. And they have a need to be in control of the conversation. So you will get pushback on that. What I've done that I thought was pretty effective is that when you do start to get pushback, do not get into a defend mode and don't go into lengthy explanations. It's better to move them into an activity where they get to experience using or receiving, yes. And what they'll find is it's not as difficult as it sounds, and a lot of people have a natural tendency to do that.
Okay, so don't get caught up in an argument about whether to use it and how to use it. Let's try it out.
Yeah, don't get into this discussion on whether the concept is appropriate or not.
Valid.
We know it is valid. We know it works. You need to try it.
Okay. Alex, you mentioned that one of the components is deciding where I should be. How do I know when to stop listening and stop reflecting and go into advocate or inquire? Are there cues, things I can watch for?
Okay, so how do you know when you move from one segment to the next in the communication cycle?
Right.
Well, specifically there is. And what we tell people is you continue to use reflective listening until you get a yes from the person who's speaking. And what I mean by a yes is not necessarily the words yes, but you'll hear things like right, exactly, absolutely. That's what I mean. So you're looking for a confirmation and then a pause. So after they confirm it and then there's a pause, that means they have nothing else to add.
So I'm looking for them to say, I've got it right. What I reflected is what you meant.
Exactly.
And when the energy changes and there's a pause, then I know that I have to make the decision. Is it time for me to speak or is it time for me to ask a question?
Exactly.
Okay.